spring late light evening. Yeah, gorgeous day in Santa Barbara. Shall we begin things? Okay.
Committee member Blackerby?
Here.
Bradley? Kaufman-Gray?
Here.
France?
Here.
Horn? Pritchett?
Here.
And Tabor?
Here.
Great. So there are no changes to the agenda or any proposed at this point?
No changes to the agenda.
Great. We have public comment. We have one public comment speaker, Ralph Furtig, President Emeritus of the Santa Barbara Bike Coalition. Come on up.
Does it say Emeritus on there? No.
There we go. Good evening. As I just said, I'm President Emeritus of the Santa Barbara Bicycle Coalition, so Chairman France and members of the committee. You may recall that 2 years ago in October 2008, Professor John Pucher came here from Rutgers University to chair the Walk Bike Forum, which the Bicycle Coalition put on. I've been in touch with him since, and he just came out with a new paper published by the Transportation Research Board. And the subject is essentially, the question is there a bicycling renaissance in North America? And I'd like to just read the conclusion to his paper there, which... the short answer to the query posed at the title of this article is yes. A bicycling renaissance has indeed been underway for the past 2 decades, with growing cycling levels and widespread interest in cycling in both the USA and Canada. There was much less evidence of such a renaissance when we wrote our 1999 article, which was based on data from about 1995. Since 2000, the initial records, trends we have identified for the 1990s have strengthened, permitting a definitive answer to the question. The boom in cycling, however, has been limited to a few dozen cities which have implemented a wide range of programs to aggressively promote cycling, such as the 9 case study cities portrayed in this article. Even in those cities, cycling growth has been highly concentrated in the central cities, and especially in gentrifying neighborhoods near the central business district and university districts, while cycling remains at very low levels at most suburbs. Moreover, cycling levels vary greatly by region. The western U.S. states and provinces in Canada have by far the highest cycling rates, while most states in the American South, from Texas all the way to North Carolina, have extremely low levels of cycling. Over the past decade, there has been large increase in funding for cycling and in the range and magnitude of pro-bike policies to promote cycling. That suggests that cycling is less of a fringe mode than it was considered even a decade ago. Indeed, cycling is becoming a mainstream mode in a few cities. Portland's 2008 survey found that 18% of its residents use bikes as their primary or secondary mode to work trip. That is comparable to cycling mode shares in northern European cities. The success of Portland is important because it shows that even car-dependent American cities can greatly increase cycling by implementing the right package of infrastructure, programs, and policies. Thus, a cycling renaissance is indeed underway in many cities in North America, but they are islands in a sea of car dominance. Over the 19-year period from 1990 to 2009, the bike share of daily commuters in the USA rose from 0.4% to 0.6%. Not much of a change. That's quite a slow pace for the country as a whole. But for the 9 case study cities, true dramatic progress has been achieved, and they offer superb examples that other cities can follow. Portland, in particular, is a model of what is necessary to dramatically increase cycling in North America. Americans and Canadians need not look solely to Europe for models of successful cycling practices. The 9 cities, by the way, are Chicago, Minneapolis, Montreal, New York, Portland, San Francisco, Toronto, Vancouver, and Washington. So I think the key is the package of infrastructure programs and policies that will make a difference here and elsewhere. Thank you.
Ralph, thank you so much.
I have a question for the speaker, Mr. Chair.
Certainly.
Ralph, you mentioned a list of cities where bicycle use has been increasing, right?
Yes.
Now, is that only big cities, and would Santa Barbara not be in that data set, do you think?
I don't know why they were chosen.
Okay.
But they are all big cities, you're right. So they may have excluded small ones like Boulder, where the university is tightly knit with
Right.
the community.
And speaking of data, could you very quickly remind us what are the data collection sets or protocols? Or I think the Bicycle Coalition actually collects field data of bike use and other transportation modes. And very quickly, could you just sort of remind the public when and where that's done?
There are different things. The one that the Bicycle Coalition has worked, partnered with the city since 1997 on, is a bicyclist count. And it's taken place, it used to be every year, but there was not much change from year to another, so it's been every other year. The last one was done in 2009, and there will be another one next month. And it's like 2-hour counts, 4 to 6 p.m. at mid-week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, counts at 25 intersections within the city. So we'll find out at the end of next month just how much things may have changed from 2009. I think they've gone up, but that's just my guess. Also, there is U.S. Census information.
Right.
Yeah.
And is the report at the website somewhere?
For our data, it'll probably be on the Bicycle Coalition's website.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ralph. Any other questions for the speaker, or are we ready to move to the consent calendar, approval of the minutes of March 10th, 2011?
Move to approve them.
Second.
All four?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Abstain. Mr. Chair, abstain. I was absent that time.
Great. All right. Thank you. We can now move straight to reports. A review of the February and March MTD monthly reports and third quarter traffic mitigation report. Is there any, I guess we all...
This is an informational item. I don't know if you've had a chance to review it. I'm not going to make a presentation, but if there's any questions regarding the report, we do have Sherry and Steve in the audience. Today is MTD Day at the TCC.
Today is MTD Day.
Great day.
Mr. Kaufman-Gray.
Well, just for the public, because they don't see these reports, I think we should notice that in February and March, due to weather constraints, has shown that the downtown waterfront did go down. But I thought was interesting is the crosstown shuttle in both months did go up in ridership, which to me looks like a very good trend. I mean, considering that is also an open type bus situation, but it shows that people are riding the bus more. And I have a feeling probably the next month will probably show even more, considering what the price of gas is doing right now.
That was a wonderful segue into what the comment I was going to make, if you will indulge me. Just today I was looking at the data for April. We had just closed the month. And as on the downtown waterfront shuttle, there was a pretty substantial increase over the previous April of about 2,200 additional riders. So that was good news. We were glad to see that. And the crosstown continued its growth as well. There was an increase of actually 22% in riders on the crosstown over the previous month, and that was with one fewer weekday. The crosstown only operates on weekdays, as you know. So yeah, I'm sure the nice weather and the price of gas have had something to do with that increase, but we were glad to see it at any rate.
Mr. Moss, glad to have you up here. I'd like to make a comment as well, unless are there other comments on the report? Well, I'll sneak my comment in before you, David. It is interesting with the with the Greyhound moving from where it's close to the MTD down to the train station on Lower State, how that might play into changes for use of the Downtown Express, or I'm sorry, the Straight Street Shuttle, and then also I had a separate comment on a more kind of disappointing note. It seemed really frustrating the massive over the last year and 6 months reduction in use in the Carrillo commuter lot. Probably both the reduction in use of the lot and reduction in use, obviously, of that shuttle. Is there any kind of better explanation of what's going on there. It mentioned in the report that there's it's not at full occupancy. Has there been any kind of insight into that?
I don't have really any more information at this time. We do need to look into that some more. I don't know if the city has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, the Creo commuter lot, we have excess capacity to sell monthly permits. They're $40 per month to buy a permit for commuters to park in that lot. So that's so we have capacity there, and you compare that to the Coda commuter lot, and we're oversubscribed in that lot where we at the point where we can't sell any more permits for that lot. So yeah, it might just be the correlated distance to the downtown, where Coda's closer to the downtown than Creo, our perception of that. But we do have the free shuttle. So $40 a month to park and take the free shuttle is a really good deal for our downtown employees.
Mr. Kaufman-Gray, do you have a comment on this point?
I just want to, on the same point, since I also work downtown, I think I'd like to see the city do a little more outreach, because there has been a lot of hiring going on downtown, and I have a feeling the new employees are not aware of the commuter lot. Where I work, I make a point to make sure they know it, but there's a lot of small little businesses that might not know that is available to them. And because I have a lot of associates, we're very surprised that the city does have this for a nice rate versus the private lots. So if there's any way the city can step up for all the new hires, because the economy is starting to improve. There's going to be some new businesses opening up. I mean, we're Barnes & Noble. That will be a new business shortly. There's a lot of new little boutiques that have opened up on State Street. And these are all workers that can't afford the, $85, $95, but they could probably afford the $40 for the commuter lot, and which would also help reduce traffic downtown and the shuttle, the 90-minute shuttle, and also just trying to find street parking.
Great. Any comments? First, Mr. Tabor.
I was just going to note, I didn't remember the source of the news, but saw today that one of the indicators we had been using for the ups and downs in the shuttle ridership was the occupancy in the hotels, and we had an increase in occupancy tax revenue recent months. So that was good news for all.
For anyone from MTD, in early 2008 was a rapid escalation of consumer fuel prices, and now in the last few months it's happened. What's your sense from your data about how is bus ridership, for any line or system-wide, tracked with the price of fuel going up in 2008, then dropping down, and now going up again? I know it's a nice multivariate analysis to test if you wanted to, fuel versus weather versus overall economy. There's a lot of theories that always go around downtown Santa Barbara about why people drive or ride a bus.
Well, we do see a correlation. When the price of gas is up, our ridership tends to be up. And, in fact, system-wide in April, not only the downtown shuttle and the crosstown, but system-wide we saw a pretty large increase in ridership over the previous April. Even, as I said, with one less weekday, most of our routes you have more riders on a weekday, obviously, than on a weekend. The one route that we've looked at in great detail in that a couple of years ago was our Valley Express peak period commuter service from San Ynez Valley. And that one, it was the correlation between the price of gas and the ridership was as close a correlation as I've ever seen in that type of analysis. And, of course, that market is even more affected by the price of gas. But even in our local service here, we definitely see a correlation.
One question I'd like to add as well, perhaps a request that would be of useful reference for other monthly service reports. It's really great how we break down per service hour and ridership per hour of buses in use. What would be great too is kind of a comparative points from other cities for their local shuttles. So say to compare shuttles like the Carrillo lot shuttle or the Crosstown Express, and then also comparing that to longer distance. So the express buses obviously are going to have very different ridership than the local kind of service buses. But it would be helpful, especially cases like the Creo lot shuttle, to kind of compare what other cities maintain for that type of service. So thank you so much. All right. Well, getting right on with the service changes, we have a recommendation that the committee hear a report by MTD outlining the possible service changes to take place in August.
Good evening, Chair France and members of the committee. And so we just gave you some good news. There's some ridership increasing, but we also need to talk about some difficult times with the budget constraints that we're facing. I probably don't need to tell you a long story about how we got into a budget situation, but suffice it to say that, as with all other agencies lately, it has a lot to do with sales tax revenue, has a lot to do, in our case, with the price of fuel, although we do have a contract with a fuel provider that will be valid until the middle of 2012, which has been helpful to us. Nevertheless, we're facing in this coming fiscal year almost a $400,000 need to dig into our reserves if we don't make a reduction in our service. We've looked for all the revenue choices we can find short of another fare increase, and as you probably remember, we just increased fares back in 2009, so we think it's not an appropriate time to be discussing that again. So we're talking about some reduction in service. In FY 2012-13, you see on the screen that if we don't do anything now, we will be facing a $1.2 million reserve issue. And when you talk about reserves with a small agency like us, there's not a lot of reserves you can dig into without really depleting the entire system. And that story doesn't tell the whole story, because that diesel fuel contract will end in the middle of 2012. And we're, of course, looking to expand that, but we don't have control over that entirely. We also have a collective bargaining agreement with the vast majority of our employees, close to 200 of them, that expires in the middle of 2012. You probably remember from the news that we were close to a strike on that issue recently. We're happy to say that at this point we're settled with both our supervisors and our maintenance and drivers. But that's the story that leads into why we want to talk to you and to our community about what we feel that we need to do. So, starting first with the line 1 and 2, and I'm going to say right off the bat that the 1 and 2 not only is totally within the confines of the city of Santa Barbara, but of course is a concern to you when it comes to parking, downtown circulation, etc. We recently, in 2007, were able to decrease the headways. When I say decrease, it sounds like it's something bad, but we made it faster to catch a bus. You could catch a bus in the morning and PM peak every 10 minutes. That's true as of today. We're proposing for the AM peak on the line 1 and 2, which is the west side, east side service, to change that to 15-minute headways. We know by the numbers that we have of riders during that time period that will mean everybody will be able to get on the bus, with the small possibility of needing to provide some boosters in that peak hour, and we'll watch that and provide boosters as needed. We continue to keep the 10-minute service in the 2:30 to 5:30 time frame, although that's changing. It's currently 3 to 6. We're suggesting 2:30 to 5:30. As you can guess, there's a load of passengers straight after the schools get out of service or get out for the day. This is a concern to you, I know, and we wanted to talk to you about the mitigation. You have this service, and we're talking a little bit about the crosstown as part of what mitigates the concerns for the Granada Garage. We believe, based on doing a study of this, that this might result in 60 less passengers per weekday. Not a huge number, but we recognize that anybody who has to jump back in their car is a concern to all of us. As we go through this, you'll see that these changes result in the ability for us to avoid that $400,000 concern or budget constraint. So I'll go on from there and let you ask me questions at any point. Feel free to jump in at any point and ask questions. The Line 22 is a wonderful piece of service that goes from downtown Santa Barbara up Garden Street to the Old Mission and the Natural History Museum, and on Saturday and Sunday only by request of a person on the bus or a person calling from Botanic Garden. It will go up to the Botanic Garden. It's an amazing piece of service that's been out there for about 40 years. Unfortunately, the ridership is low. The ridership on this service is about, I'm looking at the wrong spot here, I think it's about 14 passengers per hour, and our system ridership is about 38 passengers per hour. So when we looked at what could we do to reduce our costs, our expenses, this is one piece of service that we talked about reducing or taking away entirely. We did hold what we call Transit Talk back in the tail end of April. We had a number of people visiting us, including Deborah Schwartz, and they're members of the community, and we did hear from quite a number of people that the 22 was a concern for them, that it was in fact their only service to and from, and that they would be stuck without it. So our new proposal to our board Tuesday will be A, either to eliminate the whole route, or B, to reduce from the 9 trips that we currently provide per day to 7 trips per day, thereby saving the majority of the 22. Oh, and that's what I was looking for. Okay, 38 passengers per hour on most of our systems. Some of our system has 80 or 90 passengers per hour. You've seen some of those packed buses. On the other hand, this one had an average of 14 passengers per hour. I'm going to flip through the Line 9 kind of quickly. It's not within your vicinity, but of course if you're traveling to Goleta at all, the 9 is how you get over the Fairview Bridge. Yet again, it's a service that doesn't have enough riders on a per hour basis. So we were promoting it first to take away the Line 9 and to extend another route over that bridge periodically. But again, we've listened to the community, and what we're proposing now is to reduce to peak hour and with some limited midday service. We have in our hands to pass out to you some schedules for the 22 and the 9 if you'd like to see those at any point here. So we'll be proposing Tuesday not to drop the Line 9, but to reduce the number of trips to those trips that are most needed. Line 3, Cottage Hospital, again entirely within the confines of the city of Santa Barbara. This service goes from our downtown transit center to Cottage, and then you can see further on the map there up to the Samarkand area, out to La Cumbre Plaza, turning around and coming back in through the Cottage area. We find, as you would expect, that the vast majority of riders on this line are going as far as the Cottage, and same thing coming back in. Nevertheless, an important piece of service, which we were able, back in 2007, with the help of the city of Santa Barbara, and I should have said that on the 1 and 2 also, we were able to reduce this from 30 minutes every day, every part of the day, 30-minute headways, down to 20-minute headways, and that was very successful. Unfortunately, we need to reduce some service, and this particular route can handle the 30-minute headways, at least based on today's ridership. There will be enough space, as long as we, again, consider whether or not we need to boost. And I should qualify for a moment. I know when I say boost, some people think we mean schools. We're just talking about an extra bus when there's not enough service out there, and when we need to have additional seats or space. We also are considering dropping off the last 2 trips per day, which is a 7:30 trip out of the Transit Center and a 9 o'clock p.m. trip. The 9 p.m. trip was specifically put in there to assist people who go to the evening classes at Schott Center. Unfortunately, the ridership is as low as 0 or 1 on that inbound trip. As I say these things, I want to remind you all and the public listening that we're still in the mode of listening. So although this is what I believe today we're going to be recommending to our board Tuesday, there's still time to get information into us. And a little bit more on the 3, just flip over. Okay, that's fine. Line 36, Seaside Shuttle in Carpinteria, again outside your realm, but just to let you know, we're considering a possible route change based on some recommendation made by the city of Carp, which is to not go as far as Ashland Sandyland, which is down to the beach, but to turn around at the train station. And that will make a shorter round trip, therefore we'll be able to run the bus every 20 minutes. And that will be helpful to the community. So there's an average of 21 passengers per hour on that, and we will actually be able to reduce our costs a little bit while running the bus every 20 minutes because we aren't going quite as far. The 3031, which you know as, and I know as in my head, as the Downtown Waterfront Shuttle, which runs during the summer every 10 minutes. Currently, on summer evenings, we run late service on Friday and Saturday nights until 10 p.m. And what we're recommending that we would do is stop that service at 9 p.m. Our ridership is about 5 passengers per trip during that span between 9 and 10 p.m. So although it's tempting because it's certainly nice to have the service as late as we can, we're recommending the reduction of that. It's not a huge reduction, but every little bit helps is the theme of some of these changes. The Line 37, but better known as the Crosstown Shuttle, it's kind of a fun story. We have vehicles that have been with us a long time, which are with lead-acid batteries, so electric vehicles that have lead-acid batteries in them. Then the next model vehicles have NiCad batteries, which were kind of the newest and best at the time that we bought those vehicles. Now we've had an opportunity in those same vehicles to switch out to, I'm going to say this slowly so I get it right, lithium-ion iron phosphate batteries. Those, and I'm going to test you on that, those batteries have given us an opportunity to run a bus that used to have to be charged at least every day, of course. Normally on a lead acid or a NiCad, we can run the bus for about 8 hours and then charge overnight for about 8 hours. These lithium-ion actually will allow the bus to go 2 days without a charge if we care to. It wasn't the purpose. The purpose of doing it was to get batteries that would last a lot longer and in their lifetime span, not so much on a per day basis, but also to have more power. If you've ever been behind us on the Mitchell-Traina Bridge, you might not have been happy. Okay, you have been, haven't you? How slow we're going over that bridge. These batteries are less expensive in the first place, will give us more power, the ability to travel a little faster in some of those areas. I'm not suggesting we're going to be speeding, but we're going to be going along with traffic rather than holding up traffic and trying to be those traffic calming measures that we don't really mean to be. So we're going to be able to save a little money by reducing the number of trips that the vehicle's taking while we're actually going a little faster. We expect instead of 15 minutes during peak and 20 minutes during non-peak, we expect to be able to travel approximately 23 minutes all day long and nevertheless save some vehicles and sufficiently save some driver time. So then you come to that question again, so what happens if we reduce the number of trips on this crosstown shuttle? Because again, it's a mitigation for the garage. And our study shows that we might lose as many as 15 passengers per weekday. We're hoping, of course, that in all those cases, those passengers that we lose on those trips will in fact go to another time of day to ride the bus or a slightly different 10-minute before, 10-minute after trip. Go ahead. Other changes, and these are sort of the faster version. The Line 5, which you know is as one of our MESA services, we will reduce the number of evening trips from the current 5 to 4, and that is because we know that while we were ending at Arroyo Burro Beach, we had people who needed to go not only just to Hillside House, but into that, I've drawn a blank on the name of that neighborhood. Thank you, yes. Into the neighborhood. And so in order to go into that neighborhood and back, it would take us a little bit more time. So instead of 5 trips, it'll be 4, but they'll be the same span of time. The Lines 6 and 11 on the weekends, we need to adjust our schedule because we're not able to keep the time points at this point in time. So they'll probably end up with a reduction of 1 trip or so, 1 trip on the 6, 1 on the 11. Not a huge change, but fixing the schedule. 15X, that's the service that goes between Santa Barbara City College and what's now called Santa Catalina, which I knew as FT or Francisco Torres. And that service will just be adjusted because City College is adjusting their class times. So we'll adjust that last evening trip. 24, we have one trip coming in the morning that had less than 5 passengers on it, so we're going to do away with that trip coming in from the far end, not changing anything on the trips going out that direction to UCSB. And this is largely UCSB students riding to school. Boosters. Now, this time it does say boosters, and that does mean boosters particularly for students. And I'm going to stop a minute and tell you we're not a school bus system. We're public transit. But, of course, we have many students riding with us, and I'm glad to have them. We're showing you, we call it 2310 and 2320 that run between the Mesa and the West Side. We're eliminating them because of very low ridership. Again, 5 to 7 students riding it. Those students will have other opportunities to ride our regular system, our line 5s and 4s and so on. They might have to take 2 buses, but it's a really low ridership. And then the next one shows you at a trip from Goleta Valley, there will be 2 bus trips that are combined into one. So that'll still serve the students. They'll just be on one bus together. And the Valley Express, I think we started to talk about a little while ago, is ending on August the 19th. SBCAG through Santa Maria Transit, or SMAT, will be putting into place some different service to provide for Solvang and Buellton. One of those trips will be a trip that comes from Santa Maria, stopping off at Buellton to pick up passengers. One of those will be a trip coming through Solvang with a being purchased bus, a bus that we don't own. And those will be done through Santa Maria Transit. And one of the trips will be eliminated. Unfortunately for all of us, it was right in the time period when gas started going back up that this decision was made, because at the time our ridership had gone down, but with gas going back up, ridership's going back up. Between us and SBCAG, we're getting this information out to the community of riders so that they'll know what their choices are. And what have I missed here? Anything? And thank you. I have a lot of information to back up all of this, and certainly be glad to show you any of that, but most of all, I'd like to listen to what you have to say, which is the purpose of being here tonight.
Thank you, Chair Fisher. Obviously, the budget shortfall is challenging, but let's start off a round of conversation. Do we want to start from line to line? All right, Mr. Tabor.
Well, I'm still kind of absorbing the last item there, the Valley service. I'm not quite sure I understood that the service that you're providing or cooperating with is being terminated, and some of it's being replaced through SBCAG.
That's correct.
What proportion are you estimating that might be? We lose 100% of the seats, or?
We currently run 3 trips, and they're planning to run 2 trips. Okay. One of those, as far as seats, will be combined with a service they have coming from Santa Maria, so there's not a whole lot of seats left over available on that bus. I want to say I think there's 10 seats or so, but I may be just going off the top of my head there. The other trip that will be continued, I believe that they'll have a passenger that's 40 a bus that has 40 passenger seats, where we had more like 50 passenger seats, but they weren't all being used. So there is one trip that's going to be entirely discontinued.
Okay.
And yes, that was an issue. You might remember that originally we had a grant for 3 years, and that was how we provided the service. It's always a bit of a balancing act for us, because the money that we receive in revenues is really meant for this community that we serve, from the Winchester Canyon to Ventura County line, yet we like to be as helpful as we can. So we always didn't want to have to take away anything in the south in order to provide the service from the north. SBCAG does now have Measure A that's available for interregional transit service, and so that's a resource that we couldn't tap into the North County resource, but of course they can with SMAT.
Following up on some of the other discussion on the lines, I think the question I had was, how does the booster service work? Is it when a driver leaves 5 people on the bench, the driver will call the dispatcher and say, I left 5 riders on the bench, and they'll send somebody right out to pick them up, or how does it work?
That's a great question. Sometimes that's exactly how it works. We don't know that we don't know that you're bringing 25 friends to go to the beach or whatever. Okay. And then if you told us ahead of time, that would be helpful, but that's not what public transit is. Generally speaking, people just come to catch the bus. So sometimes it's exactly what you said. There are, in fact, a great number of people I'm talking on the radio, I can't pick them up, and we look to see what driver is going out of service, what we can do to get a bus over there. On the other hand, that's an expensive way to provide service. We didn't plan that. It's probably overtime. So most of the time, we hope to learn through the process of our ridership numbers that, in fact, every day there's 25 too many people here, and I don't want to say that like that's a bad thing. There's 25 extra people. Then we will just plan and prep, and you might not see it in our book because the book might say there's a 7:30 trip. You wouldn't notice that actually there's two 7:30 trips. We would know it, but you as a passenger wouldn't have to worry about it. It's what happens a lot on the 15. Again, that service coming in from Isla Vista to City College, especially at the beginning of the school year, the students ride a lot, and we're delighted. We find that as as the semester goes on, either people are carpooling or sometimes they're leaving the class, and the ridership goes down. So we tend to start maybe even with 3 trips at 7:30, and then we watch that, and we know that it's going to go down to 2 to 1, but then again, it might go back up. So that's sort of an imperfect science that has a lot to do with habits.
Yes, I'm living on the May side. I noticed the numbers at the stops there have gone down considerably since the beginning of the year. But finals are coming up. I'm sure everyone will jump back on as soon as that comes around. You had mentioned shift on lines 1 and 2, shifting the morning headway back from 10 minutes to 15 minutes, but not changing the PM headway. Is that because the morning is more of a concentrated rush and PM is more spread out?
It's because we know that in the PM we're getting. You're correct. The morning tends to be everybody tries to get into school and work somewhere in the same time frame, but in the afternoon they're leaving school, they're leaving various jobs. It's more spread out, but also that in the morning we don't have quite as many people coming in as we do going home in the afternoon. How did they get there? They got there in the middle of the day then. So there's kind of streaming in during the day and then coming home in the afternoon.
Okay. Well, I guess philosophically it's difficult decisions have to be made, and you hate to hear we're losing riders. I think struggle so hard to attain additional ridership, and then but we try to serve the most amount of people with the resources we have. I understand that, and I think a priority to me in this equation is servicing those folks who are getting to and from work. So I think we know which lines those are, and I think if there's a way to focus energy at those lines, that would be my priority.
Thank you.
Sherry, thanks for coming. I have a few different points. Here's a engineering nerd question. So for the electric shuttle buses, you're putting in these, they just call them lithium batteries. They fit in the same place in the vehicle. You're just sort of getting newer battery technology that works better and is probably even cheaper.
You are a nerd.
And you can just order them to fit
they didn't quite fit. You're
model.
right. We had to change the trays, the battery trays that hold them in the buses.
Aluminum foil shim or something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No, you're right. It's slightly different. I couldn't give you the exact measurements, but yes, we actually are able to get more power into the trays that we had, but we did have to create new trays.
And in the old batteries, it came to a stop on top of Mitchell Terrana Street. The driver had to wait, and then he and me prayed to the deity of our choice, because it was all a downhill cruise, and apparently that worked. It didn't take much of a slope. But are you, with this new battery availability, because I heard a few years ago the life of these vehicles, individual electric bus vehicles, were thought to be reaching its limit, and I've heard the ball bearings grind a few times. So are you now reconfiguring your planning with the new batteries that these individual buses can last longer? Or does anyone have a prediction now the fleet, so to speak, will last 10 years instead of 3, that kind of thing?
They definitely will last 10 years, and they have. We have buses that have been with us since 1990. So
I meant 10
lasted
more
20,
years.
but-
Not, yeah.
Okay, but the sort of full answer to that is that we do have a procurement in process. We have a purchase in process of the first vehicle with some lithium batteries already in it, coming to us that way. And we will be putting it into service once received for about 6 months while we evaluate it. And then it's our intent, and we have already a really old grant, in fact, to further those buses and to be able to set aside some of those buses that you were just talking about that have expanded past their life. Yes, we're hoping that means that the buses that we gain in this process their batteries will be able to last longer. The buses themselves have lasted a lot longer than any of their sets of lead acids or NiCads. We've replaced batteries several times on some of those vehicles.
Okay. You congratulate you on the Transit Talk public outreach meeting. I heard from some participants. And I know there was a lot of advocates for Line 22, the one that goes up towards Mission Canyon. So you just said the original proposal was to cut it out to 0 trips, and now the proposal is to reduce it from 9 to 7 trips. So does the rest of the proposal for service reductions sort of make up that Line 22 won't be cut as much as originally guesstimated?
No. When we first said drop the Line 22 entirely, and we're still offering our board that as an option, so it's still a good time to tell us if that's not a good thing. We would have been reducing our entire revenue hours by about 5%. Without the 22, it's going to be 4.2%. And that's not an exact number because we also just changed the 9 a little bit, but 4.2%. 4.2% will be enough to solve that $400,000 or almost $400,000 shortfall, but it doesn't go, of course, as far toward solving the next year's shortfall. We can all hope that things will continue to turn around between now and then. I'm not sure how much of a Pollyanna I should be, but yes, we can certainly believe in that.
Speaking of shortfalls, I remember in the budget discussions from 2, maybe 3 years ago, when fare increases happened. A lot of the story was that the typical funds that came from the state government were shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Are those now just all gone, and it's a much bigger share of your total revenue is from local sales tax? Or, is the state budget's hopeless on many levels, but one could argue. So is that not even a big share of your budget anymore?
It's still the biggest share of our budget.
It still is, okay.
There certainly have been some changes that have made it difficult for us. On the other hand, some of the state budget resolved in favor of transit. There's also the minor miracle of Measure A. I mean, 2008, many people voted yes on it, and Measure A is certainly helpful to MTD in spite of the fact that for all of us it's not as much revenue as we anticipated it would be when we voted yes on it, and that's just a matter of sales tax, which will, with time, turn around. How fast and how much is a good question. The other thing, what was I going to say? I'm sorry, I was thinking about what you asked, and
no, that you got to my points. And my last question is on some of these City of Santa Barbara related lines. You presented, I presume, a calculation from a model that if the headway goes from 10 minutes to 15 minutes or whatever the figure was, that would result in so many fewer bus riders, presumably to go to another mode. So is this a standard bus ridership choice behavior model? Is that like
yes.
Nation standard? Or
yes, and to answer that even more fully, I'm going to turn to Steve, but yes, that was what he did.
So I want to get to the point of, does this model differ depending on where that bus line is going? So you can predict, people going downtown, may be more willing to wait a little bit longer instead of drive, versus someone going uptown or Nolita or wherever will just say, heck, I'm driving because parking is plentiful in Nolita.
Or people on a line 3 where there's service 3 blocks away with a 6 and 11 may be more likely to still go to the 6 and 11.
So does the model sort of think about the mood of the rider and where they're going and that kind of thing? Or is it just bodies on the bus versus time to wait? How does that work?
I would say the modeler thinks about those things more
Yeah.
than the model.
Yes.
So
How?
I usually use an elasticity analysis, much like an economist would use for price elasticity, and it's a standard methodology in the transit business. You look at X percent change in headway or in travel time would lead to a Y percent change in ridership, and it's up to me and looking at the particular route and the conditions to say what would that elasticity likely be in this case based on the range of what is available through national research that's been done. And in this case, as General Manager Fisher mentioned earlier, it looks like on the 1 and 2 we might see somewhere in the range of a loss of 50 riders per weekday due to that change in the AM peak, and on the line 3, maybe 15 riders a day. On the crosstown rather, which is also part of the mitigation, maybe 15 riders per day, which is well, not to belittle anyone's need for transit, but at least it's not a significant enough number to negatively affect the mitigation that the city relies on us to provide through those services. But yeah, short answer to your question, I do consider the particular route and the particular conditions in these analyses.
When the headways got quicker, I'm going to always mix up if that's increase or decrease. When the bus, line 1, for instance, went from 15 minutes to 10-minute headways, the crosstown shuttle sort of became flat or decreased ridership. That was a theory going around. So are you all expecting with the headways to be spaced farther apart on the east-west lines 1 and 2? Will then riders go to the crosstown bus, but your proposal is to make the crosstown bus run less frequently as well. So how does that multivariate fit into your model? Or is the crosstown shuttle already with enough capacity, you think? Is that...
Well, the crosstown does have the capacity, but that very reason is why I'm not assuming that the riders that might not ride the 1-2 will shift to the crosstown or vice versa from the crosstown to the 1-2. Since we are doing some small decreases on both routes, I'm in the numbers I quoted earlier, I'm assuming that's actually a loss in ridership. That's not to say that some of them won't still ride. This is actually a conservative estimate too, because I was basing this on current year ridership, which is down from previous years due to the economy and the lower price of gas until recent times. And so it's quite likely that our base ridership with no changes would be considerably higher in the future. And there might not even be this small loss that I had estimated.
Does this model or your own experience, if you're showing that the headways are getting longer between buses, fewer riders are going to wait for the bus, do we have any way to account for how those riders are getting around instead? Are they going to then choose to drive an individual car? Is that...
they're probably either going to walk, carpool, bike, or drive themselves.
In that order, I'm sure.
And skateboard.
Okay,
thanks.
Well, to add a little bit to that is that on the Milpas side of town, or the east side, there are a lot of choices of what you can ride into the transit center depending upon where you are. There's the 14 coming in from Montecito, there's the 20 coming in from Carpinteria, and of course we just talked about the crosstown and the line 2. On the west side of town, not so much. There's the line 1 and the crosstown. But people on Milpa's side, and I just like to encourage people not to give up on us. And the skateboard's great, but you don't have to get in your car because there is still a lot of service over there. And tell us if there's not enough.
Ms. Blackerby?
Okay, I have lots of comments and questions, so bear with me. So on the first slide, you mentioned, projected use of reserves, and I'm just wondering, since I'm not on the MTD board and I don't know the inner workings, what kind of reserves does MTD have?
Well, it depends upon how you look at reserves, but reserves that don't have any strings tied to them would be the kind of reserves that we're talking about now. So you can look at our cash report and find $7 million sitting there, which I know when I talk with the union, they always think that sounds like a lot of money and maybe we should go ahead and use that. But in our case, the vast majority of what we have set aside already has some strings tied to it. And really, we don't even have enough reserves right now to cover the long-term cost of our employees who have already retired. So that would be millions of dollars that don't exist for us. So really, although I may say the word reserves, it's not really reserves that are available for something. No, but you can find $7 million.
So the
there.
non-strings attached reserves are?
I hesitate to say that it's really anything because we also have this unfunded liability with the retirees.
But I mean,
so.
every level of government has that now. So
yeah, exactly.
But we still. Okay.
I wouldn't even want to be. I'd have to think real hard about that answer.
Okay. And the other, just kind of a general comment, and maybe there's no answer to this. As we're looking to all these different things, all these different proposals, it kind of, I guess it's hard to kind of get a handle on what saves how much, right? And so I don't know if you have those specifics, but that's kind of like when I'm, I don't want any of these things to happen, but when I'm kind of prioritizing what I think, like what's the least bad thing, or you're only saving that much by cutting that, it's not worth it to lose that ridership. That's kind of what I'm wondering, but you don't have to answer that right away.
We do have it, of course. I didn't bring it with us. Apparently, either one of us didn't, but we could email that to you.
That'd be great.
Instantly, so that you can see. Yeah, some of it's pretty small if you're talking about one small part of a trip, and some of it's significant, like the 3 and the.
So I'm really glad to see that that one of your proposals is to keep the Line 22, because it is Lifeline service, and even though it's averaging 14 people per hour, most likely, darn near every one of those 14 people, that's how they get to where they're going, and there's not really going to be many other ways.
Can I interject there that because we heard that, and because we were uncertain about exactly what everybody needed, we've gone out to every single trip of every passenger riding and talked to them so that we can hear what it is that they absolutely need.
Awesome. So what, from 9 to 7, do we know which trips are eliminating, or that's going to be figured out later?
We can pass over to you. Thanks, Steve. The Line 22 schedule. And I think there's one trip in the middle of the day, and off the top of my head, I'm sorry to say that I need to study. But I can do that. I just got this recommendation fully vetted by the planning department this afternoon. They just finished, so it's okay. We steal one from you.
Is this the current or the proposed you're passing out?
This is
the proposed, yes.
Okay, great.
So,
all right. So I guess we don't know which one,
currently,
but a middle.
Yeah, I can tell you. Currently, there's a 6:35 a.m. trip that's being proposed for deletion. Then the 7:10, 7:50, 8:25, those remain the same. And currently, there is a inbound trip at 5:30 or 5:50 and at 8:45 that are both being proposed for deletion.
Okay.
Just getting those people out there.
So yeah, I would definitely, what you're saying, tell us if you think that's a bad idea to eliminate the line, and this is me telling you that would be a bad idea.
Thanks.
And I think it really is a great line of what you were saying of like kind of especially the weekend stuff to get to the Botanic Garden. That's really helpful, I think.
I'll kind of
let's
finish
see.
a sentence on that. I'll
Yeah.
be looking for all the help we can get from the entire community to encourage people to ride the 22, so that I'm not back here in a year saying, and now we're taking the rest of the trips.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, just kind of in general, over the past couple of years, even though the economy's been, in the tank, you guys come to us and I go, okay, what are the service changes going to be? And the past couple of times it's been like, oh, okay, not so bad, right? And part of that being we had that fixed fuel cost, and also that the economy's bad, people take the bus. And so when I saw at the transit center the other day the list of, my jaw dropped to see all the different lines that are affected, and maybe it's long time coming. We've delayed the pain as long, which a lot of governments obviously are dealing with. Line 3, close to my heart. I was upset when it went to 20 minutes just AM and PM, but it's still people are still getting to and from work, which is ultimately the most important thing. I can tell you that real life situation, if it was 30 minutes, because sometimes it's true I'm not perfect, I will miss the bus, and I'm willing to wait in the morning when I'm getting to work. You cut it close. I'm willing to wait for that 9:03 bus and be 10 minutes late to work. Don't tell anyone. But am I going to wait 30 minutes, or am I going to go home and get my car and drive? And I will go home and get my car and drive, most likely. And I live close enough that technically it's a schlep, but I could walk if I needed to. But for folks who are up further on the line, that's not an option. Also, the reducing the weekday span of service, eliminating the 7:30 and 9 p.m., I think is a really bad idea. I know I take it, but I know that other folks do, that sometimes that's the last chance to get where they're going. Some of us could take the 6 and 11, but for people farther away, it's a little more of a trek. So
Do I hear that as a recommendation?
Yes.
Okay.
Everything I'm saying is a recommendation.
Got it. Okay.
I think it's funny that the Seaside Shuttle is getting farther away from the sea in Carpinteria, so hopefully you don't have to change the name of that. The Downtown Waterfront Shuttle, the idea, was it originally... Did I see in the original proposals that was going to change, that was going to be more, or was that just the crosstown that I saw?
I think just the crosstown.
Okay.
I don't remember anything else about downtown.
With the transient occupancy tax bouncing back the way it is, I think, and what's your definition of summer service? Like, what's the summer?
Starting with Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day weekend.
Okay. I think it's really helpful. I think it's great that it goes till 10. And I think ridership is going to increase on that, not just because of the economy, but because our tourism is bouncing back, and people love that thing and hop on it all the time. The other thing that was interesting when we were talking about the crosstown and the downtown shuttles, how many people does one of those seat?
27.
Okay, because I know it's like really, and you're sitting on each other's lap.
Yeah, that's with the standees.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, exactly. So I think sometimes when we're looking at, like, crosstown shuttle averages 21 per hour, I don't know. It's not the same thing as like the 3 or the 11, right? It's still pretty well.
Although, of course, when we say per hour, we're not assuming that there's 21 people sitting on the bus for a whole hour. They're on and off the bus.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Another thing I'm kind of wondering, and maybe we can save this till the end, the total revenue hours that you're proposing to eliminate are
4% of our almost 200,000, so it's about 8,000 hours.
So, and I know you have a brand new collective bargaining agreement in place, but is that going to eliminate jobs, or are people going to get...
Thank you for asking that.
Moved around?
We're being very careful at the moment. We part of our collective bargaining agreement changed our age to retire, but offered people an opportunity to make their mind up by the end of this year. So there are some people who are who have my hair who are deciding to leave sooner rather than later. So we're just being careful not to hire at the moment. There won't be any layoffs necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm grateful to be able to say that.
Okay. And then the line 5, reducing evening trips from 5 to 4. I'm assuming the smartest way would be eliminate one of those middle
trips.
Okay.
That's what's happening, right?
Great.
Right.
And the line 24X, eliminating the first weekday inbound trip at 6:05 a.m. When's the next trip? When's the next inbound?
I'll answer that. We did have one person saying that was a very important trip because they use it to come in to catch a Greyhound out with some frequency. But so the other first trip coming in from UCSB, is I'm at the wrong place. I'm at Saturday. 6:05 is the one we talked about. 6:40.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my concern about that, and just to keep in mind that the 24X isn't just students. A lot of families who work downtown or further on who are taking it to the transit center and then have 1 to 2 more buses to hit before they get to work.
Yeah, that one is down to something like 1 passenger per trip, sometimes none, sometimes 2.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I'm just to keep in mind that not everyone coming from there is just a student hanging out downtown.
Absolutely.
And then, yeah, I mean, the larger question of Measure A, right? And that kind of having been moved around, in my understanding, to benefit MTD more than Measure D did. And my major concerns about the lines, the mitigation measures, and the lines that the city is closely involved with, that we're are we getting less for our money now? It kind of feels like it's a big concern, and I'm wondering about the mitigation of saying, like, well, if it's 15 minutes, it's still, who ultimately decides if it's mitigated enough?
Ultimately, the passenger decides whether they'll ride it and mitigate, and the numbers that we provide to you will, you have a planning commission requirement to mitigate up to 985 daily trips, 229 p.m. peak hour trips. We provide information to you all the time on that, and that's been being met. But yes, it's a concern. And your question about Measure A is valid. Certainly, in Measure D did not have any direct money coming to MTD, but by the graces of the city of Santa Barbara, and as it turns out, also the city of Goleta, and eventually the county and city of Carpinteria, and UCSB to a smaller extent, we reached out in 2006, and by 2007 we were getting assistance from these agencies to help provide more service. Unfortunately, of course, after that the economy tanked, so things changed. But back to that storyline, that assistance that we got is in fact how Measure A then got translated into a certain dollar value or a certain percent of everybody's assistance to MTD. And so I know that if I say to you sitting in this city that we want to reduce some service that is related to your city, it must feel like, oh, we took the money and ran. But we need to look at the entire agency, and obviously we're not just talking about the city of Santa Barbara, we're also talking Carpinteria, Goleta, but we need to reduce our costs, because even though it's I like to call it a minor miracle that it was voted in and that it went so well, nevertheless, the amount of money that any of the agencies have right now isn't as much as it was. We would hope to be able to turn this around over time. I can't promise that, and I feel like we have a responsibility to look at the entire district, not just specifically what happens within one agency, although I don't want to be offensive saying that.
No, I agree, and I care about their lines, too. Yeah. Did you have something on this?
Yeah, and in terms of the mitigation requirement for the Granada Garage, that was a mitigation requirement that was placed on the construction of the garage by the Planning Commission. We have to take a look at it. We do it on a quarterly basis, but we have to take a look at it on an annual basis to see if we are meeting the mitigation requirement. If we don't, we have to report to planning staff and eventually the Planning Commission, and then we have to see what we can do to get back to meeting that mitigation requirement. Whether it's MTD figuring out a way to get more trips off the road or come up with other measures. But we're okay right now, but we're going to have to pay closer attention to the mitigation requirement over the next year to make sure it doesn't fall below what we're currently meeting right now. And if it does, then we're going to have to come up with some other measures.
And
it's going to be difficult for us where we're struggling in other areas in the city.
Right. And it's our hope that you'll look to us. We'll certainly be looking to ourselves to solve that. But I agree with you. Unfortunately, it's a responsibility that's not just our responsibility, but certainly we'd like to be the solution.
Right. Yeah, and also what you mentioned about the boosters, boosters, not the school ones, but if there's 5 people left on the bench, people are going to know the schedule. People will look at the schedule, and if there's not a bus coming, if there's been a trip cut out, they're just not going to go, right? They're just going to stay, they're going to drive, and the number you said about 60 less passengers per weekday on the lines 1 and 2, I think that's devastating. I mean, if that turns out to be, and people may be able to move their schedules around, but let's be honest, majority of people taking the bus don't have flexible work lives or home lives, and they're, slammed running from one thing to another. And that's either going to be a car trip that's going to be more, it's not MTD's problem, and I know you care about it, but it's not your problem about our downtown parking, and it's not your problem about what our congestion is, but you do more than anyone else to relieve congestion, right, downtown, but it's just something we're going to have to deal with, I guess. But yeah, I just hope that when you bring the suggestions to the board that you do, pass on obviously everything that the public has brought you, and I do appreciate the public outreach. That really means a lot, and I appreciate you coming to us as well. But lots of agencies are digging deep and taking a hit and making cuts. I know that. Unfortunately, the type of cuts you have to make really, really affect people, and it really trickles down. So hopefully you'll take some of the things we say into account, and if we can really especially at the time when everyone's starting to take the bus again, you just hate to if someone's first foray into bus riding, they find out, look at the schedule and go, oh well, this doesn't really work for me. They're probably not going to be back, maybe until the next time the gas skyrockets. So anyway, I know I've talked for a long time, but it's really important to me, so thank you for listening.
Absolutely. And if I could also let you know that when we talk about boosters, even though, as I say, we're not a school bus company, but one of the things that happens a lot for us is overloads that are related, in fact, to UCSB and City College students. And we're delighted that both campuses are so green and there's so many riders. It has created a situation for us where we have had to put more resources into serving those populations. And we will be going to those campuses to ask for more assistance, because we agree with your comment that what we're concerned about providing here within the community is not only the students, but of course those people who are trying to get to work and to doctor appointments and so on. So it's hard sometimes to balance those people that might be sitting at the bus stop at the moment with those people that might be encouraged if they could see there was a time to get there. But we'll be going to both campuses to seek more assistance, and I already know that they both will say that that's up to the students. So we'll be working with those students.
Do they have to a lock-in? What do you know what it currently is for UCSB and City College?
Steve, do you know off the top? One of them is $12 and one of them is...
They're different because...
Right, because one's a semester and one's a quarter.
I don't know the exact amount.
I don't know exactly.
$12 per quarter?
It's insignificant amount.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But raising it, of course, is one of the many things that are being raised on those campuses.
And you'd have to wait till spring anyway, next spring.
Right.
Since they just had their elections.
Right.
As a parent who just paid her daughter's
thank you.
registration at City College, it is a very small amount. It's less than $20 a semester.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a conversation with Sherry and Steve a couple of weeks ago. I said, I'm willing to pay twice that for my daughter to take the bus versus paying for gasoline for an automobile for her to drive to school every day. But it's not up to the parents, it's the students who have to vote
Right.
for it.
Yeah, trust me, as a former UCSB student, all the lock-in fees you pay and what some of those things go to, it is a steal to ride the bus basically for free, or, take it, 9 times and you've paid for it all. Not that public school, people in public higher education need more things to pay for, but that one you actually get what you pay for.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Blackerby. Mr. Kaufman-Gray.
Hi, Sherry. I have a few questions here. One, I know you answered, but I just didn't hear it. On the downtown shuttle, you mentioned the passenger count from 9 to 10 p.m. currently. What was that?
Right. It was under 10 passengers. I think it was under 5 passengers. We actually have it on the screen if you want us to pull it up, but it's very low.
Okay, under 10, between 9 and 10, and there's probably,
and most
2
of the time
shuttles
under
between
5
then,
passengers,
or is it?
Going, both directions. So
Okay.
there's...
I'm sorry, is that average or just the actual number?
It's average. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's 5. The most it was 10, but it's more like 5.
Okay.
So I didn't average it. Sorry.
Okay. On the
High and
lines
low.
1 and 2, which I think you've heard a lot tonight about.
Yes.
Before the mitigation, what was the number of the AM PM before mitigation?
It was 15 minutes
It
between
was 15.
trips,
It wasn't
right?
20. It was 15.
No, it was 15.
And then we
There-
reduced it to 10.
There was a past time period when it was 30 minutes and then down to 20 minutes and then down to 15, but we're talking over the last 10 years or so. So in 07, it was 15 minutes between buses, and then we reduced it to 10.
And then with the mitigation, we brought it down to 10 for the AM PM.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure that decision was made based on just mitigation or on assisting transit. But
Well, what we did when we made the change, first thing we did is when working with MTD and members of this committee, the Downtown Parking Committee, we decided we wanted to enhance transit.
Right.
And we identified lines 1 and 2 and 6 and 11 to improve the headway from 15 minutes to 10 minutes in the AM PM peak hour. And what we did prior to finalizing the agreement with MTD to provide Measure D funding and downtown parking funding for that, is we went to, Rob Dayton and I went to the Planning Commission to have the mitigation requirement changed from the My Right bus pass to the enhanced transit. So it was a cross-town shuttle, lines 1 and 2, and the Mesa Loop. That's how we met the mitigation requirement. And all those combined got us more than what we needed in terms of mitigating the trips.
I forgot about that. Thank you. Good reminder.
That's right, because we had the My. Okay. The other question with the crosstown shuttle. So the crosstown shuttles, you said seat 27
I'm sorry,
passengers?
it's actually 27, including the standees, so it's about 19, depending upon how large the people sitting are.
Okay, and right now it's averaging 21?
Passengers per trip?
Yes. And you said the city average is 38, but that's because you're looking at large buses and
Just per hour.
Right.
per hour,
So-
right?
Right, passengers per hour we're talking about.
Okay.
And yes, our system-wide, including the lowest and the highest, is, they were looking at it. The lowest and highest is 38.
Okay.
We certainly have some trips that are 80 passengers per hour, but on the crosstown, people aren't really on it for an hour. That would be an entire round trip.
Right.
So,
Okay, so it's 21. Okay.
Right.
And the 21 you're talking about, when was this? Because as we know, ridership all of a sudden is peaking a lot this last month because of gas. So was this done in December? Was this done in November? When are these?
October.
October.
Right.
Okay.
Tends to be a month where we don't have holidays and weather is generally speaking okay. So we tend to use October.
Okay.
We do, of course, look at the entire last year, but October is the base.
Okay. Do you do that because it's before the rainy season too, and it doesn't
And before the
affect-
holidays and when school's in service, and so
Okay.
pretty much has all the things we need.
Okay. 6 and 11, I didn't hear anything, so I assume that's going to stay the same.
It's the 6 and 11. We're changing the schedule on weekends. We didn't bring you that yet, but it's going to result probably in one less trip on the 6, one less trip on the 11, because we're not able to keep the schedule right now. We're not able to travel as fast as we need to and keep up with
Okay.
that schedule.
Okay.
But no change on weekdays.
Okay. Well, my concern is, and I think I agree with what Mr. Tabor said, is, getting people to and from work, I think, is very important. And the lines that really affect that, I think we should really try to keep service as much as possible. I hate to pull one from another. I mean, I do agree, though, line 22, I don't think that should be eliminated. I think there is that need, so I agree with line 22, keeping that service. But I think in general we need to emphasize the getting to work, going to work, and especially look at communities on just areas where we know the income is a lot lower. And you look at the Mesa area, not the Mesa, you look at the east side area and, of course, the west side area, incomes are a lot lower, so they use the bus a lot more as a way to get to and from work. So I'm real concerned about this reduction of service in the morning, and that's my concern generally. I understand the constraints, and we do have to, everyone has to make cuts, but if there's any way to save that, that AM period to keep it 10 minutes, because I'm sure when we get the news from, say, the end of this month, that you're going to see ridership is probably even going to be higher because of the price of gas. And I just really hate to see this happening on these two lines. Downtown shuttle, I think, that's a whole different ballgame. I know we're going to talk about that in another agenda item, so I don't want to go into that too deep. But that's designed as a tourist way to get them up and back and forth without driving their cars, and I think that is a very important thing in the summertime too. But when we get to 1 and 2, I really hate to see us tweaking from this great success that we've had and getting people to ride the bus more, and we start cutting back on that area. It's just going to be a hardship for a lot of people. So those are my comments.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kaufman-Gray. Sure, I have one kind of big question, which is what I'm worried most about, which is we're looking at right now the changes for kicking in August. And then the fuel contract expiring June 1st, 2012, and whatever's happening with the collective bargaining agreement ending July 1st, 2012. So that's even of more concern is the next fiscal year.
Right. That assumption we made of 1.2 million could be much worse, could be better. We could get a fuel contract that's better. When I smile, hoping, praying that that'll happen, but it's doubtful. So yes, it could be worse. And if we don't take the opportunity or take these tough moves this year in the $400,000 range, then obviously that'll exacerbate the following fiscal year. That's why it's always so hard. But yes.
But basically, it's going to get worse next fiscal year. That's the prediction?
There's a possibility that we're going to be able to extend our fuel contract, not for the same price, but we're watching market price now. We have an agreement with our supplier that if we lock into a price that they allow, sort of on a moment's basis, and we're going to ask our board to give me that authorization Tuesday, but it's not going to be $2.57. We'd be lucky if it was $3.70. Nobody else is getting their diesel fuel for $3.70. So there's a possibility it'll be better than our worst hope, but not certainly better than today. The union, and I want to say this with all sincerity, to thank our employees for their hard work on an everyday basis and their agreement to a union contract that lasts this 2 years with no increases for them, other than a small increase on their health insurance. That's a really big thing. I know we'll be asking for something similar again. I'm not going to negotiate via television, but I also know it's hard for everybody. So, I can't really know what that's going to be. Yes, it could be much worse. And then what do we do? Yeah.
So, I guess I'm just predicting, because I guess, was it 6 months ago or 9 months ago that we shaved off, I don't know if it was 1% or 2%, with some changes in scheduling?
We call them sort of surgical cuts at that point. Yeah,
All
small
right.
amount. And I know that when I say something is a small change, it really affects somebody or some 20 people or some 60 people very much.
Yeah, and then obviously the worry is we're making more substantial cuts now, kind of no matter what. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of severity, and then the concern I have is that comes back again for the fiscal year 2012, and we've been looking at more substantial cuts. So obviously it's a time of creative thinking. So yeah, it's hard because obviously we're sitting here, we're looking at service that we want to see maintained, and there's just this economic trade-off that's happening. As a general comment, I want to say maybe one quick specific comment. I guess the line 1 and 2 is of the most concern to me for the mitigation and for the projected loss. And is just to clarify, is that 60, or what was the number again, per passengers per day,
Yeah,
projected
60.
loss? So then,
Passengers per day, not trips. Right.
passengers
60
per day.
people.
So
Right.
then when we look at our monthly service reports, we're not looking at that number being down by 60, we're looking at that number being down by 60 times how many ever weekdays.
I'm going to
there are.
not try to answer you and look to Steve again to make sure I'm getting this correct.
The report that you get that includes the lines 1 and 2 is the quarterly mitigation report, and that is an average daily number that you see in there.
Oh, that is average daily number. Okay. I need to be more shrewd in reading those reports. Okay. Thank you. That makes me less worried about that. I have to say, it sounds really trite, but for things like the line 22, and I did live in Mission Canyon for a little while, it's kind of a, just to echo what you're saying, it's a use it or lose it. These low ridership routes present major challenge. And the one thing I want to kind of put out there to not just to the MTD, but certainly to our staff, in terms of thinking creatively, especially knowing that we may have further challenges coming up in the future, how can we improve ridership and also improve access outside of the bus within local urban core transportation? And how can we improve transportation to the bus? We're talking about reduction routes, basically shifting some ridership to nearby routes that are just a few blocks away. How can we facilitate that? Because if that's going to be a reality, we need to start answering that question. And some of those might not even be, as majorly financial as political decisions. So we're looking at access, challenges to access for our residents, and we need to be proactive about how to address that. And if service is going to fall back to some more core routes, then we need to be honest about that, look at that happen, and plan for that, plan for that contingency, because we need to maintain access for our residents. So sorry to issue such a bland or vague challenge to staff and to MTD. But, on MTD's side of things like that, if we're going to have more riders travel, from their origin getting to a route, we need to have better bike parking nearby there, right? There's challenges like that, the bike theft at the transit center. When issues like that are going to ultimately come to a head, I think, if we're facilitating people coming to those core routes. I'm sorry I cannot give any better solutions, but I do hope that whatever happens facilitates the least pain, especially into the coming year and financial year 2012.
And I haven't really said it to you or to the audience listening, but obviously that's our hope too. We don't make these decisions or these recommendations lightly. This is what we do. We'd like to provide more and more service. But unfortunately, we have a budget to consider, and that doesn't, it's not just a word, that's a reality for the following years where we might have to cut much more deeply. I would like to say that the City of Santa Barbara and the other agencies do work closely with us when there's any kind of a housing project or a building going on. They work closely with us to not only give access to the bus stops, but to provide shelters if necessary, which unfortunately could be helpful if you're having to wait 5 more minutes in the rain or whatever. That's giving us a lot more street furniture, so to speak, and presence. And we're certainly open to other ideas. We will also need to be thinking about whether or not we need to increase fares. That is not today's discussion, this year's discussion, but certainly that's something that we'll have to consider over the longer-term future.
Real quick, before another question, another thought that occurred to me is certainly we have mitigation for our Granada Garage with a LRDP, if and when that comes out through UCSB. I don't know. Is that feasible to have mitigation to better fund the 24X and other routes used by students, and not a student lock-in either, but just something that the university would have to pay for mitigation to expand?
The Planning Commission is coming forward, I think. We're working closely, of course, with UCSB on their LRDP, and we have, I want to use the word insisted, but we've worked with them to develop a plan that says that if indeed the ridership becomes such that we need more service because of the provision of more housing and more students on campus, then they would find a way to help us with those resources that are necessary. That's a loosey-goosey way of saying it, but at least we're all looking at that same question: how do we make it more possible to solve the problem for the students, while that also then makes it possible to save resources for the rest of the community?
One last comment I had too. Every rider is different in their behavior. Just to kind of throw out anecdotally, one thing that's hard for me is, and I know this is just the challenge that we have, but when service schedules change, I don't keep up on it. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember from 2 years ago, it picks up, on the hour, and that, is tricky. Also, as everybody know, I hope that now on your smartphone, you can check the bus schedule, right? And if you find yourself downtown and you can connect by bus, you can just check. You don't have to find a paper schedule. You can just find online, just in the exact way that you find driving directions. I hope people know that. And through Google Transit, if you're not really sure that you don't know that you live on the Line 3, you can input just like you would with a MapQuest your origin and destination and find out where to go and what time to be there. So thank you for the ad. Good marketing. And just to further that to the members of the public out here, use it or lose it. One way that obviously this budget gap can be supported is by more ridership and at the fare box. So we have assisted bus service, but we also have to pay for it and use it, and that's how we can see increases as opposed to cuts.
And a little further add, if I can, this year at the Transit Center, we're going to be able to provide some new fare options, which basically will be machines that will sell tickets and tokens with credit cards. So we know that's the world we live in. We realize we don't have credit card access on buses, but we'll be making it more and more possible for you.
Great. Good. Oh, yes. Yes, Planning Commissioner Schwartz. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Deborah Schwartz, Planning Commission Liaison. Ms. Fisher, first of all, I want to commend MTD because the outreach that you've conducted and the very sincere care that MTD has demonstrated is really remarkable. There are many other cities that do not conduct it in this way. There may be a single public hearing, but then that information, and I've had this direct experience myself in Northern California, is really not incorporated into the board decision. So first, my kudos go out to you for that. On the one hand, we have cost reduction and cost avoidance, but I think there are opportunities, and so I would like to ask you to talk to us a bit about ridership stimulation and what type of perhaps joint marketing efforts you might be discussing, whether that's with the lodging industry. So when visitors come to town, in addition to our residents, how can they learn more about the availability of our great transit system? And perhaps there are combo discount packages that could be offered, sort of a transportation and entertainment, cultural activities and transportation. I mean, I'm not certainly reinventing the wheel here. Other cities do that, but I didn't know to what extent we've really reached out and partnered with some of these other sectors to make that happen.
There's a couple things that are already in place, but we're always open to hearing more. We work closely with the CVBD and certainly with Car Free Santa Barbara. And for those who aren't familiar with that, even online, Car Free Santa Barbara will help you get deals when you come into Santa Barbara that include lesser costs of your hotels and your lodging and so on. So we work closely with them. In fact, we have, one of the sad things was we've already done a lot of that with the Line 22, and yet it still hasn't grown to the level we would like it to. But there's that aspect. Certainly, we work with Amtrak. If you ride the bus up here, excuse me, that would be a train. Ride the train up, you can ask the conductor for a transfer to MTD and then get a free ride with MTD. And in fact, Caltrans pays us back for that. And it's a program with them. So we have some of those creative things in place, probably not as many as we could, and we certainly look to more and more of those opportunities. When we talked about increasing ridership on the 22, it would certainly take an awful lot of riders on a 22 to close that $400,000 gap. However, the 22 would not be the, I suppose, target, if you see it that way, of our seeking to reduce costs if it wasn't for the fact that the ridership was so low there. And if it was an opportunity for the community, not only of riders on the 22, but those community of people who come into Santa Barbara and want to see. One of the things we have to be careful of, though, is not inappropriately competing with the private sector. And so, as you all know, there's a trolley that actually gives a nice tour and talks about what you're looking at, where our driver would probably be happy to tell you what you're looking at, but doesn't really have a spiel prepared. So I'm certainly open to other suggestions, though, and not just sitting here today, but please get those those suggestions coming in. And thanks for the compliment on our open house, so to speak. And we also went out to Goleta, and this is another opportunity, we think, to hear from the public. So we do want to hear, and we did make changes based on that.
Any further comments?
Yeah,
Mr.
thanks.
Pritchett?
Thanks. The rest of the comments sort of bring up some other broader policy questions, and of course there's no obvious answer, except I was not updating my Facebook page with the photo. I was just checking the smartphone friendliness of the MTD website, and it's okay, but could be better. So if you have some spare brain power on your staff, and you have the brain power, it may not be spare, think about an MTD app for Android and maybe even iPhone if people still use those, but an Android app for MTD. So that means it fits the format well, and it's not using a conventional website where you still have to, on a little screen where you have to move way all over and you forget what you're looking at. So
Yeah, thank you. We have been having a
see
conversation
where
with
that's,
someone about that.
but the Google Transit is great because it's right there on the left side of the screen and it shows up right away. Building upon what Mr. France was saying, what's the latest on bike rack capacity? I know years ago, we blame the state again. It was a state law that said the rack could only protrude so far.
And there still is.
Is that so? The state law about bike racks, and it's generally two, or like on the front of the bus.
Yeah, it's what Sportworks, who provide the bike racks that we have, and they're wonderful, provide a bike rack that's available for 3 bikes, but unfortunately it extends further than allowable by state law.
Okay.
And we certainly don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're doing something inappropriate. We have, with other transit agencies, asked Sportworks to take a look at that, and we've also asked the state to take a look at that, but nothing has happened in the meantime.
Our assembly member is very savvy with a lot of things, especially the need for bike racks, I'm sure. And the MTD board, right, you're meeting Tuesday to go over the proposed service, essentially reductions.
Yes,
or
at 8:30.
moving them around. So if a great surge of public interest happened, because they're watching our meeting right now, of course, do you still have for the board schedule adjustment opportunities before you really got to lock in the budget mid-June or so? It could happen, I guess.
You're correct when you say mid-June or even the very end of June. At the
end of the
very
fiscal
latest, we would be locking in our budget. So, yes, May 17th is the date that we prefer, not so much just because of, to finalize this decision, not so much just because of budget, but because we now then need to provide the information and have it ready by August.
Yeah.
But there's a little room for conversation still.
But really, you heard some input from our committee, and we have got a good pulse on Santa Barbara City, but like when the fair discussion happened a few years ago, it's always a public policy tension between what does the transit district and government owe the public to make riding on a bus an option, no matter how few riders it may be. And there's a few, but just a few, totally dependent riders on line 22, and they came to Transit Talk. But at the same side, bus routes skewed to be really useful and friendly to people going to work rather than going clubbing. That's another major policy emphasis. And then you could roll it in the other variable that if they go to work, they help generate economic stimulus that makes sales tax that helps MTD in the total budget. So maybe you all, for your own board, could sort of remind them of this ridership-based only way to decide on bus service versus the broader policy goal that we need a network to get out there in the whole South Coast with less of an emphasis on ridership, and that's totally political judgment, of course. So that's where we see it is, and we've reminded the public. You have a major discussion next week at the board Tuesday morning, and then the decisions really have to be made mid-June or so. So there we go. And when things slow down, you'll get that Android app with MTD getting going.
We have a young lady from City College who has already come to us with an Android app, so I suspect it won't be long before there's one out there.
The iPhone app.
I need the BlackBerry. Don't forget about us, please.
Well, the good one was cross-platform, but we'll be a beta tester for that.
All right.
All right.
Ms. Blackerby.
Yeah, just a couple more things. Yeah, I just want to mention again for anyone watching that it's Tuesday, May 17th at 8:30 a.m. Okay.
550 Olive Street.
Right, at MTD headquarters. And yes, don't forget the BlackBerry app, because I do look up schedules on my phone, and it is not easy to, you're like scrolling in like 3 different things at once. Anyway, luxury problem, I suppose. If these reductions are made, or some form of reduction is made to the 1 and 2 in the Crosstown shuttle, since in general it's getting you to and from the same places, different schedules obviously. What I'm wondering is if there's a way to, and I think you'd probably have to shift the shuttle around more since it runs less frequently, but to make it so that if you miss that line, going to the east side, line 2 going to the east side, but hey, the Crosstown shuttle leaves not 23 minutes from now, but 5 or 10, kind of being able to, so they're not going at the same time. And maybe that's how it is already, but since they're coming every 10 minutes, it's kind of harder to see. But if those get farther apart, it would be, I think, really excellent if you'd be able to work it out so that you're not waiting that long to get to the next, your next way to get across town.
So you can balance by going from one to the other to make that choice. Yeah, definitely increase your options. And it's part of what happens, of course, is it's always a judgment call of when you're actually trying to get the passengers in from the other side who are coming over this side. So it's always a balance with the schedule. We know that sometimes you'll see on Milpas, you might see a line 20 and a 14 almost right beside each other and wonder, why is MTD doing that? But, of course, it's because the 20 came from Carpinteria, the 14 came from Montecito, and then they converged on Milpas trying to get to town at approximately the same time. But, yes, on a broad base, that's definitely what we try to do, and we'll take a look at that as we go through this.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Well, General Manager Fisher, thank you for hosting us for an extensive conversation about these cuts.
Or Sherry is okay, too. Thanks.
Sherry, and we do not have any motions on the table for this item, so I believe we should move on to our next item, which is the...
And we will take all this information back.
Which is the MTD Downtown Waterfront Shuttle Annual Contract.
Right. Well, the annual contract with MTD for the downtown waterfront shuttle and the commuter lap shuttle is up for renewal this June. Expires on June 30th. Just to give you The reason I have it before the committee is kind of good in terms of the previous item is we, for the second year in a row, the amount of Measure A money going to MTD to support that service is remaining flat. So it's remaining at previous fiscal year level because the Measure A money is lower than originally projected when we did the investment plan in 2008. And so I've told MTD last year, and I'm telling them again this year, if you have to cut back on service to stay within the amount of money that is being provided, then that's what we're going to have to do. And that's one of the things that you're looking at when they're looking at the late evening service. Just can't afford to do it. The other thing that I want to talk to the committee about is the fare currently is 25 cents per rider. You know, the uncertainty of what's going to happen with the redevelopment agency. We know it's going to expire in 2015. If it expires earlier, $300,000 of RDA money is going to support commuter lot / downtown waterfront shuttle. That goes away, then I have a $300,000 hole in the budget that we need to bridge. And one of the things we looked at, well, maybe we need to look at raising the fare from 25 cents to 50 cents. It's a 100% increase in fare, but it's only a 25 cent, still cheaper than the regular service that MTD is putting on the street. And just to remind everybody that the reason it's 25 cents is the city is providing $1 million of Measure A money and downtown parking money and RDA money, and we're buying the fare down. The regular fare for the shuttle is $1.75, but the city is buying the fare down to a quarter to make it really affordable and attractive to everybody. And it was free when the city and MTD first started it, but we had some people riding it all day long. So the city fathers back then decided, hey, we need to charge a nominal amount of money to discourage people from getting on it and just staying on it all day long just to get out of the weather or find a place to sleep or whatever it was they were doing. It's before my time with the city. I had a downtown parking committee meeting this morning, and we're talking about this service as well. And one of the things they asked about is there some creative things that we can do in terms of downtown parking and people parking and riding the shuttle. So one of the reasons we have the downtown shuttle is in fact, I was looking at the ordinance this morning, is it's a mitigation measure for the downtown redevelopment area. Yeah, and the requirement was to have a people mover transit service. And the way we did it was a commuter lot service as well as a downtown shuttle. Yeah, and the whole idea of park it once concept where you park your car in one of our downtown parking lots and go ahead and pay for parking and then take the shuttle up and down State Street. And instead of having to search for parking and putting more cars on the road, and especially during the summer months where we have a lot of people who are driving up and down State Street. It makes it a little difficult driving up and down State Street. And another thing I have asked Sherry to do is this summer and maybe during the fall, we could do a ridership survey or a survey of both ridership as well as how they feel about paying 50 cents versus 25 cents. I've heard a lot of people saying, well, the whole reason we have the shuttle is for the tourists. I'm not convinced that's the whole reason. If everybody that's riding the shuttle is tourists, I know, you all know, looking at the reports that Steve prepares for us, is during the months of July and August in particular, we see a 25 to 30,000 rider increase, and that's tourists coming in. But during the rest of the year, it stays constant in the 30 to 40,000, monthly riders. Some of them are tourists, but I think some of them might be our local residents who are using it too. Maybe not just Santa Barbara City, but Carpenter, Goleta, maybe even Ventura coming in to shop in our downtown. And I'm kind of curious to who are the people who are using our shuttle during the non-tourist peak seasons. I use it from time to time. Come in with my family and we park in lot 6. We come down, down to this area down here, and then maybe we'll walk in one direction and take the shuttle back up. And I think a lot of our locals are doing that as well. So I'm kind of curious to see what that is, to see what that ratio is. The amount of money that we give MTD is covering approximately 90% of the cost, and they're still covering another 10%. That was something that we negotiated, how long ago was that, 5-6 years ago? So I just wanted to bring this before the committee, kind of get your input on your feeling about should we be exploring, an increase in the fare, or should we hold off on that? And the other is what some of the ideas that the Downtown Parking Committee has on, some way of, encouraging people to just park their car once, and if we can do something with the rates of the parking or the rates in the shuttle or some type of system. I'm almost thinking that we need to get a subcommittee of this committee to sit down with probably the finance committee of the Downtown Parking Committee to start talking about some options that we have to really encourage people just to park once and use the shuttle to get up and down State Street and not go from lot 10 and to go, park in lot 2 because they want to go to Nordstrom's instead of just walking or
They're going to Saks.
Going to Saks, in the parking lot 3, so, and the shuttle is a good experience. I did it a couple of times last summer with the guide dog I was raising, and it's real easy to get on. Probably within, I think the couple of times I used it with Lester, within 5 minutes of getting to the shuttle stop, it came to pick us up. It's really convenient. One of the other things is, continue to market it. That's in the agreement to market it. So I just want to get a little bit of feedback from this committee as we start looking at during the survey this summer, and then probably again in the fall, and as well as where we are with looking at an increase in the fare.
Should we start? Does everybody have a comment? Do you want to do a line? Maybe start with Mr. Kaufman-Gray?
I guess the one comment is, how much does the 25-cent bring in every year right now?
We have estimated right around $120,000 a year. We're not sure if we do another 25 cents, we'll see another 120. Steve has to do.
We could tell you what we've done so far in that, and yes, I know you're going to ask me about the elasticity of this, but using the standard elasticity, it would say that we'd lose about 25% of the riders. And then there's the modeler's ideas when he's looking at that and saying, if it's a quarter more, that's 100% more, yeah, you should lose a lot of riders, but it's only another quarter. So the assumption that Steve made based on that information put together is that we would probably make at least $60,000 more. All of that is a judgment call based on the elasticity rules.
Okay. That's a lot of quarters. I like that. This is the survey you're already going to plan to do. Is that what I understand? So that's not a discussion where you're going to do the survey. Well, I always thought that it was, especially with how long it's been a quarter, I'd be willing to wait and look at the survey and see what the results are. But I'm willing to definitely consider that small increase because that isn't a whole lot. So those are my comments.
I agree. I'm excited that the survey's in the works. I think that we really. I think it's interesting to do at any time on any line, but especially for that. And I think that we'll definitely find that it's not all tourists. But yeah, I agree. I'm never for fare increases, but 50 cents is I think fairly reasonable, and for the large amount of tourists that do ride it, they're not going to be like, I was here 3 years ago and it was a quarter and now it's 50 cents and I'm not going to get on the shuttle. I'm guessing. I'm just guessing. We'll find out. But yeah, I think in the future, after we see a survey, that's something worth looking at. But it's such a gem, and I think it's good to point out that we do buy down the fare, that it's not like, oh, this is just really cheap to operate. So I think it's good for the public to hear, like, we're doing you this favor. And also what you're saying about getting together with the Downtown Parking Committee to maybe put something together of some kind of incentive. If you park, you can ride for, cheaper. It'd be interesting to see if other cities have done something like that. I'm sure someone has somewhere. I don't know if you know of any, but see what kind of models there have been, which would be good to know before we just, looks like a good idea to us, but I don't know if you've heard of anything like that.
Haven't heard anything. That's something we're going to have to research in terms of like our parking program. It's unique from other cities primarily because it's so cheap and with the 75-minute free period. And I'm not aware of any other city that has the electric shuttle bus like we have running up and down State Street. fact, we're what other cities look at in terms of if they want to do some type of shuttle service for using electric bus rather than us looking at other agencies.
Yeah, I guess I mean any type of transit and parking kind of together.
But that's something definitely we can work with Sherry and her staff.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Pritchett.
Thanks. Brownings, what again is the contract status? I thought I heard you say it was June this year.
It expires on June 30. So we're going to be going to the council next month to renew it at the current level. Yeah, and the way the fare works is we get a credit towards the amount of money we give MTD, and they normally would like to do, and I'm going to speak for Sherry, she can talk more about if we were to do a fare adjustment. There's a process that the MTD must follow to change the fare, but as long as they follow the process, we can implement it sometime later than their normal time.
So the contract is not locking the fare. It has provisions to change the fare, even though a new contract is renewed.
Yeah, with the way Jerry Estrada, their assistant general manager and the controller, we've been talking, we put language in the proposed agreement to give the flexibility to the city and the MTD to increase the fare up to 50 cents if that's something we want to do sometime during the next fiscal year.
What's the expected duration of the contract with
It'd
that?
be a one-year agreement.
Has it always been a one-year contract?
Since we did the master agreement, we've been renewing it on an annual basis. When I came to the city 10 years ago, it was a 5-year agreement, but we had to send notice 90 days prior each year.
Right.
And we've just been doing one-year agreements. And right now with the economy and the budget the way they are, it's better just to do a one-year agreement because there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to do any CPI adjustments.
So does the current or the proposed contract renewal have any issues with MTD now proposing to cut back that service a little bit?
No. Like as I mentioned earlier, we told MTD the amount of money we have is what we had last fiscal year and the previous fiscal year. And when I had a conversation with Jerry last year, if you have to cut back on your service, then do it. And so what the agreement that we had 2 years ago I think it was 15,088 hours, and the language is between 13,000 and change and 15,000 hours.
So the contract has a range of service hours.
Right.
So.
And I leave it, and it's totally up to MTD to put the service on. They're the experts.
For optimal ridership.
And
and
to
all
get
that.
the riders
Okay.
to provide the type of service. I'm not going to tell Sherry how to do her job, and she's not going to tell me how to do my job. I trust them in terms of that type of work.
Separation of agencies is always good. Well, I think this is great. I've been saying for years that the Transportation Committee and the Downtown Car Parking Committee need to coordinate a whole lot more. I've had vast, ambitious proposals on how to do that in prior careers. So I think it's a great proposal to think about a lot of options. We've got a little time with this flexible contract renewal. And if a system could be set up to have people park their car once downtown and then have some way to get on the State Street Shuttle for free or a discount. How you verify they put their car downtown, I don't quite know yet. Although some of the lots, because the lots consume the ticket when you leave, you can have a live ticket in your hand, and otherwise you don't keep them when you already paid for them. So maybe, I'm sure they've probably even talked about this. I ride the State Street Shuttle to go to the train station sometimes. I'll ride line 1 for the transit center and then find it on State Street. I think there's a variable about headways for the State Street Shuttle could be better. It's often jammed, or people won't stand there and they'll just keep walking down, and then when they get to the next one 2 blocks later, look again, is it coming? The thing's so slow and conspicuous. But my sense is bumping the fare to 50 cents would be met with a highly inelastic ridership response in that, you're going to ride the thing anyway. I think it could be even $1 and hardly see a drop in riders. Yeah. And you got to figure out if you need then a machine to take the money that could consume bills instead of, right now I think they're only for coins. There's another variable when things are lively. People get on and they don't drop a quarter; they just get on, and the driver is just trying to get into traffic again, and stay on schedule, which often variables, highly variable. So I actually, I don't know how MTD cares because it's mainly city money, but I would encourage this contract renewal not to just say up to 50 cents. Put up to 75. And it's not going up at all until this study and survey is done, but leave open the flexibility. And I think once this gets out there in public discourse, I think a lot of people would say, that's such a great, convenient service when I have visitors and we're all partying and unable to drive, and we're paying a lot for hospitality downtown anyway. Another buck in that bus isn't going to matter to people. So I think that's an option, and another option could be have the State Street Shuttle in a more of a rider commuter mode, have it accept transfers. Doesn't do that right now. So sort of a way to tweak the market for sort of the novelty riders who will pay $1 or a quarter or whatever. The transfer doesn't matter. For people who use it in part of their commuting network, a transfer would help. And then the great analysts at MTD can figure out how will that affect the income level, if people are now using transfers. So anyway, as long as the contract has the flexibility, it's good. And have 2 or 3 committee members from each group hammer this through.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pritchett. Mr. Tabor.
Thank you. When did we go from free to 25 cents? 10 years ago? 5 years ago? About 15 years ago. Okay.
Mid-90s.
Okay.
Well, it's like worth a nickel now.
Yeah. We're starting to touch on some big policy points when you start talking about this whole parking thing downtown, and I really like the idea of sitting down and hashing some of those ideas out further. The idea of parking once when you come downtown makes sense, especially if it's coupled with pay a shuttle fee once, and you can kind of ride the shuttle all day long for $1 a day. So some of the ideas I think start adding up there and making some sense if they're thought of collectively. So I think sitting down and chatting those out should be our next step following the survey. And I think the idea of serving the tourists versus serving locals, I think we're serving ourselves by serving the tourists. I think we get to that time of year where it's not so many the number of people downtown in July, slowing everyone, all the locals downtown by trying to find where the parking is and looking here and looking there. It's how many times they have to circle a block to do that. And if they're getting in their cars every time they come back with a bag to do that and do that all the way up the street, that compounds itself too and compounds the problem. So park once, ride once, for a ride how many ever times you want. And combining those fees, I think, has some ideas too. If you pay for the shuttle when you pay for your parking, has some legs. So let's move on to the next step.
Great, thank you, Mr. Tabor. I'm definitely hearing some creative ideas already, and we don't even have a subgroup.
Nor a staff report.
Nor a staff report, which would have even encouraged more creative ideas. I love hearing the concept because, especially in terms of funding, we're really already bundled between this shuttle and downtown parking, as well as talking about commuter lots. I mean, just honest opinion, Mr. Pritchett mentioned $1. $1 is, in a sense, kind of a base price that people pay for things. You can't pay for, a little candy machine with 25 cents anymore, and especially if we consider somebody coming out of one of the commuter lots and want to use the State Street Shuttle, if their commuter lot thing that they pay for monthly or however is their free entrance, then I'm a lot more amenable to something more than 50 cents and $1. And if I'm a tourist in another town, I don't mind paying $1. And yes, it's a way shorter route than a typical bus. And I think all of these ideas of transfers bundled with parking, maybe you pay, maybe people do pay for the first 75 minutes, but they get an all-day pass on the shuttle. So I definitely think we're not doing anything now because this is not even kind of really kicking in for this council meeting coming up in June, is it?
Yeah, June 14th when we're going to council for renewal. But this is good dialogue, and if there's 2 or 3 members of the committee that want to volunteer to work with me and the subcommittee with the downtown parking committee, and we'll probably be doing it over the summer and even the fall once we get the second survey. That'd be great. In terms of my other hat, managing the downtown parking program, where we got the 75-minute free period, and then people are trying to get out within the 75 minutes, so they only have to pay $1.50. So I'm looking on the other side where people don't want to pay $1 or $1.50, and they're trying to get out and not pay for parking. So it's a balancing act that we have to look at.
The
so
bus is fun. It's worth paying an extra.
Coming downtown Santa Barbara is fun too, and then you have the experience of riding the shuttle. So there's a balancing act that we have to look at. So that's why working with the downtown parking committee, who has that in mind, and how we can look at using the park once and using the shuttle, and how we can work that out, be great if we get both committees together and doing some really good brainstorming. I look forward to something like that. I think it'd be enjoyable working with both committees together on something like that.
Great. Are we looking at any future joint committee meetings?
We can do that. I think probably what we can do is have the 2 subcommittees work and at least get some preliminary ideas and maybe do a joint workshop when we have some ideas on the table, see how everybody feels, and we're probably going to have to go back and refine that. But we definitely can do 1 or 2 joint meetings as we go through this process, but get a lot of the heavy lifting at the subcommittee level.
Yeah, obviously a joint committee is a big table.
Mm-hmm.
2, I think we talked about this maybe even starting a year ago, and I'm sure conversation has been long ongoing, but have we ever just appointed a liaison, kind of like Deborah Schwartz is our liaison from the Planning Commission? I mean, what prevents us from, aside from the fact that downtown parking meets at 7:30 in the morning, what prevents us from appointing a liaison and just starting to get on the same page? So obviously with the end of the RDA and this kind of funding, we do need to be on the same page.
Being here at 7:30 in the morning, the only thing that prevents the committee from doing that. There's nothing that prevents you from having a liaison to the downtown parking committee, ABR, HLC, or Planning Commission. In fact, it's probably a good idea that you do that, especially as we have the ABR and HLC, as we have projects going through the process. But it's equally important with the downtown parking committee, having that relationship with them and hearing what they're talking about and how that might impact the work that the TCC is doing.
Ms. Blackerby.
Would that be something we would need to select who that person was as a committee to go to these different things, or is it just like whoever the sucker that gets up at 7:30 or whenever the HLC, which I'm sure is like during the middle of the day or something? What would be the procedure for that?
Well, I think what we can do, we most likely will have a meeting in July, and we can put that on the agenda to select liaisons for the various boards and commissions. I think it'd probably be easier just to have it agendized.
Yeah, I would appreciate that if we could add that.
Ed, that is, why didn't we think about that already? That's great.
Does anybody just want to volunteer right now?
Well, the default mode is the chair can serve that role, but we can figure it out too.
All right. Well, let's do agendize that for our next meeting, and Oh yes. Mr.
Just
Coffin
before
Gray.
we close on this one on the agenda item, so if the agreement's done in June, and after that, say the fare is changed, could things like reinstating from 9 to 10 on the shuttle be back on the table, or you already have contracts with the drivers, so you could not do that after June?
There is, of course, a time point at which we're done with the driver's bid for the year, and that's really is kind of the June time frame would be the latest. If we changed our mind later than that. Well, let me start again and say, this summer, we're going to still have that late service because our changes don't start to August 19th. So we could still extend it, for this summer through September without that being a big issue. But normally, we do things in August. But August to September is not a huge issue. So we're really talking about a year from August when we would be, or a year from summer, years from May, when we would be putting that into effect. So that gives us a lot of time still to talk about it. The one other thing that's on my mind about timing is we do put out a new bus book that would be effective for August 22nd, and normally that bus book says what the price of the shuttle is. So it'd be nice if we could hustle this all up and get this done, but I don't think that that's going to be able to happen before that bus book. So if we can think creatively about what we might say in that book, there's a discussion going on, check with us later, or we're just going to say it's a quarter.
Just don't list it.
yeah, or don't say it all. Anyway, any creative ideas on that as we go through this process would be well taken.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a good point that Sherry makes. And, realistically, I'm just thinking back 6 years ago when we changed the rates in the downtown parking lots. We spent over a year studying it with the public outreach and all that. And so when we started it was for the next fiscal year. And then we wanted to delay that by 6 months and had to go into effect on January 1st. So realistically, if we're talking August, during the summer doing another survey in the fall, and then the two committees get together and other strategies we might be looking at. By the time we get through the process and all that, it could very well be for the next fiscal year, beginning in July of 12. So that's something that we would talk about at the subcommittee and full committee levels of both committees.
All right. Any further comments on our report and our agenda item? Actually, a quick question. When is the council meeting that this will be coming to?
It's June 14th, 2 p.m.
June 14th. Great. Okay. Real quickly, I have kind of before we close, a request. I don't know if maybe I'm just addicted to email. I don't know if any of you all might have the same sentiment, but I think it would be more helpful to me personally to receive agendas and reports by email than even by mail.
Snail mail.
Even by snail mail. And it is, whatever, $1.42, when a packet comes through the mail. But even if it's both email and paper, I think too, especially in this case with, I'm sure there's a lot of changes, happening with these service modifications, that would have allowed maybe a report coming in a little bit later than ideal, but at least something coming in. I don't know when the service change report came in. Is that something that, because like a process point, we could change?
It's really the preference of each individual committee members. Member of the downtown parking committee this morning said, "Don't mail me the agenda, just email it to me." So if you want email only and not a paper agenda, that's something that we can do. It's really up to the preference of each committee member. I just suggest that you think about it, if you don't know now, and just email Kim what your preference is. If you want to email as well as a paper one, we can do that. If you want email only, we can do that. If you want paper only, we can do that. It's really up to your own personal preference. I was just thinking, when I was talking to that one committee member, he goes, "Yeah, I got an iPad. I put it on my iPad. You get it in a PDF form, and then I can just have it on my iPad and bring it up, and I'm there. I don't have to worry about, what did I do with my copy of the agenda?" Because I always misplace my downtown parking committee agenda. And the reason I have this notebook is it's harder for me to misplace my notebook. And Kim usually gives it to me the morning of the meeting, so I don't misplace it.
Yeah. It's also invaluable, the ability to search your email for old agendas and documents. So, great. And of course, having a good file management. Well, thank you. Any comments from the board or from the public before we adjourn? Great. Thank you to MTD for staying up with us and
Next
guiding
meeting
us
is
through
July?
this.
Looking at having a meeting in July, just talking with engineering, and we have some project management.
Great.
Oh, good.
Great. Well, thank you. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Done.